Imagine running for political office without prior experience, without name recognition, without any billboards or posters, and with almost no campaign budget. What sounds like a surefire way to lose an election was actually a winning strategy for one little-known candidate for the European Parliament this summer, Lukas Sieper from Germany. But how did he pull it off? For this video, I got an exclusive interview with Lukas to find out just that.
You can achieve anything if you just keep on going. And if you have a good idea, just go with it. And if you lose a few years, then that's how it is. But if you keep strong, then you can really become an MEP with 27 years and a small party that no one has ever heard of.
This is the story of how a political underdog beat the odds, why this was only possible in Germany, and what mainstream parties ought to learn from his success. Let's dive in. Welcome to Catch the Eye Politics, where we explain how European politics works in practice. This summer, 182 million EU citizens cast their votes in the European elections, choosing 720 new representatives. They're called MEPs, which stands for Members of the European Parliament. You might have heard that the political far right made some serious gains in those elections. But what's been less discussed is the surprising success of independents and newcomers from the political center. Take Lukas Sieper from the Party of Progress. He's pretty much unknown in Germany, and nobody expected his brand new party to win a seat in one of Europe's most powerful institutions on the first try. I asked Lukas what they did to go from the 20 votes in their first local election in 2020 to the 228,000 votes that made him an MEP this year. And he started his response by listing what they didn't do.
We didn't spend a lot of money. We had a budget of 2,500 euros in total for the whole election. We didn't have a single poster in all of Germany for our election, which I think makes us the first party in German history to get a seat without a poster. What we did is we did a lot of social media, obviously, and tried to be better than the big parties there, which we managed. And we focused our whole campaign on the Valomat, basically. Therefore, we managed to punch way above our weight on social media and reach hundreds of thousands of people, even though we only had a few hundred followers.
The Valomat is a free voting quiz that asks your opinion on 38 political questions and then shows you how your responses compare to those of each party in the election. Millions of Germans use it before casting their vote, so it's a great way for new parties to reach a lot of people. And Lukas is not the only one who made it into the European Parliament via the internet. Maybe you've heard of Fidias Panayiotou, one of Cyprus's 6 MEPs. Fidias started out as a YouTuber, and initially his candidacy was largely seen as a joke, until he received the most votes for any single candidate in Cypriot history. Fidias relied heavily on social media and word of mouth to quickly build a following. Even without a clear platform, he was able to secure the trust of almost 20% of voters in Cyprus. So newcomers like Fidias and Lukas are much more media savvy than most mainstream politicians. But Lukas is convinced that his party's success is not just because of their unconventional methods, but also because of their unconventional politics.
Inside the democratic spectrum, we do not follow a certain ideology. We are pragmatists, and therefore sometimes we are conservatives, sometimes social democrats, sometimes liberals, sometimes greens.
And because they are unaffiliated, a political blank slate, they can appeal to a broad range of voters.
The people have no reason to distrust us. We are the new kids on the block. This also has some challenges because the people also have less reasons to trust us on the other side. But if you are from the CDU, from the conservatives, you will have people that despise you because they despise you for years. Their parents despised them, their grandparents despised them, and the other way around. And that we don't have. So we shake up the system, but in a good way.
But people like Lukas and Fidias are not just shaking up the system, they're also adding to the European Parliament's fragmentation. Political fragmentation happens when power gets split up between more and more competing groups. This is especially common in proportional electoral systems like the EU. For parties and politicians, fragmentation is an obstacle because it means they have to spend more time and resources working with rivals, all while their own funds and staff keep shrinking. And it also makes political majorities harder to find. Some researchers think that fragmentation makes governments less effective, which can frustrate voters and even lead them to support anti-democratic and authoritarian leaders. Now, the European Parliament has always been highly fragmented, because EU elections are less like a single union-wide vote and more like 27 separate campaigns whose winners are all thrown together. But it's gotten especially bad in recent years. Take a look at this graph. It shows the number of individual political entities per member of the European Parliament since the first elections in 1979. This is one way to measure fragmentation, and as you can see, it has reached a new record. At the inaugural session of the 10th European Parliament this July, a whopping 223 national parties, electoral coalitions, and independent politicians were represented. That's the highest number ever in the history of Europe, even though the parliament had 30 extra members before Brexit. For reference, the Dutch House of Representatives, which is often used as the example of a fragmented parliament by political scientists, currently has members from just 15 different parties. So the European Parliament is now over 3 times as fragmented as the Dutch one. This is largely because there are way more micro-parties with just a single representative on the EU level, especially from Germany. But why? Well, first of all, because Germany does not have an electoral threshold for the European Parliament. An electoral threshold is a minimum share of votes that parties and candidates have to reach to qualify for seats. This cutoff is what protects most national parliaments from Dutchification. Germany, for example, has an electoral threshold of 5% for federal elections, but again, none for the EU. There actually used to be one until Germany's constitutional court struck it down in 2011, which explains part of the jump in our graphs. Germany gets 96 seats in the European Parliament, so you only need to get a little over 0.5% of the national vote to win one of them. Lucas's Party of Progress received 0.6%. EU elections are also more accessible for small parties in Germany because you need to collect way fewer signatures to register for them. And sadly, because the competition is less steep.
Germans, for some reason, have this perception that the European Union is not so important like the national politics. So if you look at all the other member states, you have really the A team here, the best politicians. There's a lot of former presidents and VPs and ministers, and the creme de la creme of their national politics is coming to the European Parliament to be an MEP. But if you look to who the German big parties are sending, they are sending either the backbenchers or they are sending people that are close to retirement.
All of this makes Germany the best country for small parties, at least on the EU level. And Lukas is not the only one who has benefited from that. Back in 2014, German comedian Martin Sonneborn first won a seat for Die Partei, the party, a project of political satire. It's also no coincidence that the first pan-European party got its start in Germany in 2019. Although Volt ran in 8 member states and received a much higher share of the vote both in the Netherlands and in Sweden, only their 0.7% in Germany actually won them a seat. In total, 7 German parties currently have representation in the European Parliament, but not in the Bundestag in Berlin. If you suddenly feel the urge to go out and start a new party in Germany, I'll have to disappoint you. This loophole is about to be closed. See, the EU Electoral Act of 2018 makes electoral thresholds mandatory for big member states. Once the Spanish parliament finally passes this law, even parties running in Germany will need to get at least 2% of the national vote to win any seats in the European Parliament. Supporters of this rule change argue that it will protect the parliament's ability to act by decreasing fragmentation. But critics have pointed out that a 2% threshold would only remove a handful of parties and politicians. At over 200 total, that will hardly be enough to make the European Parliament more functional. Plus, fragmentation is not all bad. I mean, the whole point of the European Parliament is to represent the EU electorate. Us. And we're all pretty different, aren't we? So maybe it's a good thing to have so many different viewpoints and approaches in the mix. United in diversity is the EU's motto for a reason. Lukas thinks fragmentation is a price worth paying for representation.
Of course, small political parties add to fragmentation. But is this a reason to have no change in the given political parties at all? 0.5% is 1 out of every 200 people. And I think 1 out of every 200 people should be represented in the parliament that governs the life of all people. Because the most important thing about democracy, next to the will of the majority, is the protection of the ideas of the minority.
Fragmentation can even be a good thing, because it gives rise to new ideas and forces politicians to compromise. The more stakeholders that are represented, the more inclusive decisions have to be. They may be harder to reach, but at least they'll enjoy broader support. An electoral threshold would also mean more votes going to waste. Parties that don't reach the 2% mark might still receive a high share of the vote total, but it just wouldn't count for anything. That wouldn't exactly improve the EU's democratic deficit. Finally, MEPs are used to the fragmentation. If anyone can handle it, it's them. I mean, the European Parliament is no stranger to chaos. That's just another Wednesday in Strasbourg. And actually, if you focus on the political groups, the European Parliament doesn't look so fragmented. Political groups are cross-country alliances that cluster national parties into ideological families on the EU level. So you've got the Spanish Socialists and German Social Democrats in the SD, Christian Democrats and other center-right parties are in the EPP, the Greens go with the Greens, and so on. Now, these groups don't always align on every single issue, and individual MEPs often break the ranks, but groups facilitate cooperation immensely. Without them, the European Parliament would probably be a huge mess. The 2024 election resulted in the creation of a new group on the far right, but historically speaking, having 8 groups in the European Parliament is nothing new. In fact, there are now fewer MEPs without a group than there were after the last election in 2019. From that perspective, the Parliament has become less fragmented. The biggest issue with fragmentation in the European Parliament might not be the presence of small parties per se, but the fact that small German parties are overrepresented. Other big member states like France and Poland already have electoral thresholds, keeping tiny parties out. And that doesn't seem very fair. But if you ask me, the EU has bigger fish to fry. Arguably a more urgent problem than fragmentation is the general shift in the European party system that we're currently seeing. I made a whole video about this, so go watch that next. In a nutshell, Green and nationalist parties are gaining ground, while the old fight of left versus right is losing importance. For the European Parliament, the systemic shift has meant that the centrist coalition is shrinking, while more and more MEPs come from parties that oppose the EU altogether, and they're no longer small. In fact, Marine Le Pen's National Rally is now the biggest French party on the EU level. Same goes for Giorgia Meloni's Brothers of Italy. I'm not sure that electoral thresholds would really address that. So instead of passing rules that make it harder for newcomers to enter the political scene, established parties might want to think about why fewer people are voting for them. If you ask Lukas, it's actually pretty simple.
People are fed up by the big political parties. They failed. And it's sad for me to say that because I voted for one in the last federal election. I was a member of one in my youth. They sit in ivory towers where they cannot imagine anymore how the decisions that they make even affect the people's real life. And the people know this, the people feel this. And unfortunately, this is the same reason, I think, why they are voting for extremists like the AfD. But the people that are not taken over by their negative emotions, but follow their positive emotions like hope and the wish for progress, they will turn to people like us. And this is exactly why we founded our party in the beginning.
I pointed out to Lukas that he's walking on a tightrope here. This idea of disconnection, of political elites versus real people, it comes straight out of the populist playbook. Then again, surveys show that this is how many people feel about politics today. And Lukas thinks we shouldn't close our eyes to that.
I'm not saying that they lost connection because I think they are evil or corrupt or stupid. It's a criticism out of friendship. And I think if more democratic politicians would emphasize this criticism, then in every second world the populists and the extremists do it, this situation loses power. They only have so much power because no one else says it.
Maybe it's this unfiltered honesty that the established parties are missing. I mean, Fidias calls himself
a stupid YouTuber,
and Lukas admits that founding his party,
it was a drinking idea.
Old school politicians don't say that kind of stuff, but it works. People like Lukas and Fidias show that the established parties are not just losing seats to extremists, but also to somewhat populist centrists? I mean, it's really hard to define their politics. What both Lukas and Fidias have in common is that they don't follow a clear ideology, which seems to be at least part of the appeal for their voters. People love to talk about polarization, how voters are drifting towards the extremes. But in many countries, it's people in the political center that feel least represented by the existing parties. That sort of goes against the idea that people are mainly driven by polarization. Maybe they're actually driven by a desire for a different kind of politics. That's also what Lukas told me.
The people on the corners of the political spectrum, so the populists, the extremists, they are the loudest, especially on social media, because this is how all algorithms in the internet work. No matter the social media algorithm, the Google algorithm, all of them focus on nasty topics, loud discussions, people who push for negative things because this will get more views. Even though it seems like today that the people are very polarized and close-minded, it's not the case. The majority of the people in society want to live a secure life where they can follow their dreams, save the planet, have good jobs, good education. So if you just focus, like you should in a democracy, on the will of the people, you will get elected, even if you only have a few thousand followers and euros for your campaign.
The success of people like Lukas and Fidias may come as a welcome motivation for mainstream parties to not just cater to demands from the political fringes, but keep in mind the median voter, who doesn't feel strongly either way. What's still unclear to me is whether this political pragmatism or radical centrism, or whatever else you want to call it, can be successful in the long run. In a way, it's what French President Emmanuel Macron has been trying to do since 2017, and it's not been going so well for him. Pragmatism is a tricky strategy, because trying to please everyone and always looking for the middle ground can feel arbitrary, like you have no values. And who wants that? All things considered, I think the rise of unconventional newcomers like Lukas and Fidias can be a good thing for Europe, and we could all benefit from their outside perspective. In this sense, fragmentation might be a price worth paying for rejuvenation. Of course, by itself, the rise of innovative micro-parties and independent politicians won't magically fix things. We, the people, also need to do our part, not just by voting for newbies, but also by getting involved. As the saying goes, there can be no democracy without active Democrats. In that spirit, I'll let Lukas have the last word.
Democracy is a system that gives us the most security and freedom and liberty out of all systems that humanity has ever designed in our history. But it is not a system that is working on itself. Democracy is a fight against intolerance, against the taking away of liberty all the time. And so please do not only participate every time you get the chance to do a cross on a ballot. Join parties, join political organizations, visit the parliaments, visit your members, and be a part of a living democracy. Don't just watch.
That's it for this video. Please hit like if you liked it, subscribe if you want more, and leave a comment below if you've got some thoughts to share. And as always, keep your eyes open.